Now streaming on Peacock.
By all that's holy, Bridget Jones.
Hello, old friend.
Bridget Jones is back
We are about to embark on an adventure.
for one final chapter.
Anything else I can help with?
Yes.
Experience every moment
Do you think about what might have been?
and fall in love
To Bridget.
all over again.
It's time to live.
Bridget Jones, Mad About the Boy. Streaming now only on Peacock.
Hey, this is Mark A. Altman, and
And this is DAREN DOCHTERMAN.
And this is Ashley Miller.
And we are the Inglorious Treksperts.
look at that. How about that?
Hey, live, we got it right. That's pretty good.
For every lively
For everything, there is a first time.
Yeah. Well, I want to welcome everybody. This is our first attempt, and maybe our last,
Actually.
to do a live Inglorious Treksperts podcast. We've obviously many times had the conventions on the podcast, but we do wraparounds, we tee it up, we edit it a little bit. But this time we're actually just going right into the.
We'll do it live.
We'll do it live. It's like my favorite year or something. I wish Uncle Milty. We're doing it live, like the heyday of live television. So today we want to talk to you about the future of Star Trek. And it is only appropriate that today is December 7th, because, of course, in addition to being a day that lived in infamy for Pearl Harbor, it was the day that Star Trek the Motion Picture was released in 1979. And why is that applicable to the future of Star Trek? Well, for a lot of reasons. This was the future of Star Trek in 1979. There hadn't been new Star Trek content since the animated series went off the air. For a long time, there were all kinds of rumors. Not in rumors. I mean, it was going to be a TV show. It was going to be a movie. It was going to be a low-budget movie. It was going to be a TV show. It was going to be the cornerstone of a fourth network. All these things. And what ended up happening? It became a big-budget movie, $43 million. Now, Darren, this is usually when you interject.
This is when I interject that on day one, they had already folded in all the costs from the previous 10 years of all the development, all the deals with the actors being paid. Everything was folded into the budget, and I think it was at least $15 million over budget on day one. So, yeah.
But the thing to remember about that is that that's pretty standard practice in Hollywood accounting. For example, I think Batman 89 has yet to turn a profit because of how they calculate it. And I know you guys think I'm joking, but I'm not. Or when you would read about back in the early aughts, Superman Returns costing $250 million. Well, yes, if you count 20 years of failed attempts at developing that movie, including lots and lots of like visual development, costume development, all those expenses,
And
$250
Tim
million.
Burton, J.J. Abrams,
Yep.
all those people who tried to do a Superman movie.
It all adds up. And it was the same deal with Star Trek the Motion Picture.
But the $15 million basically included scripts that were developed for the TV series, scripts that were developed. There was, a bunch of movie shots at the movie. There was Phil Kaufman's Planet of the Titans, where the Enterprise is mistaken for the ancient Titans and bequeaths humankind fire. It's the ultimate time travel story. There's the God thing, where Captain Kirk fights Jesus on the bridge of the Enterprise. I won't tell you who won. And so many stories and so many history. And there's even The Cattleman, which was an early attempt by Gene Roddenberry to develop a Star Trek movie about a race of sentient cows. And it was an attempt to examine the nature of eating meat.
It was the 70s, man. A lot of shit happened.
People were doing a lot of LDS.
Yeah, we tried to milk a lot from that story. Renee.
Oh man. Doubt you're
Now, I'm leaving.
Yeah, that's scary. So Star Trek: The Motion Picture comes out December 7th, 1979, and it's interesting because you talk to people. For many people, it is just, if not the best Star Trek movie, right next to Khan. It is a remarkable movie that has a place in the, and then for other people, they call, like Harlan Ellison, the motionless picture. It's lethargic. It's boring. So it's a very polarizing movie. Obviously, we're all huge fans of it. Darren, of course, was the associate producer and visual effects supervisor on the marvelous director's edition, which rectified a lot of the problems from the theatrical cut. I just wonder if you can talk about what that meant to the future of Star Trek at the time. Did it ensure it would live long and prosper, or did it really put it on the precipice of never being heard from again?
Well, I think, like Spock says in the movie, we've witnessed a birth. It's the next form of evolution for Star Trek. And I think that it certainly made enough money at the time. It didn't make Star Wars money, but it made enough money to have them consider doing another movie, as long as they kept the budget down. And they kept the budget down on the next movie by using all the sets and using a bunch of the visual effects from the first movie. But they rushed it so much, and they pushed the envelope so much that they released basically a rough cut. And what people saw on that opening day was not a finished movie. And Robert Wise said it himself. He was not ready. He didn't have any previews. He didn't have any audience feedback at all. So he couldn't do a fine cut on it. But thank goodness, 20 years later, we got together with Mr. Wise, and he produced the final cut of the movie, and we did some extra visual effects. And then 23 years after that, we go back and we do it finally at film resolution. And I think that the version that you can see in 4K now is the best possible representation of the film. It's a different film, basically. And I'm very proud of the work we were able to do. And I think that at the time, it gave a push to make all the other movies. And I think now people can finally respect it for what they were intending to do at the time.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned it was a birth, because, when I think about birth, having had 3 children, I think about...
You had 3 children.
Yeah, I didn't have them. I just watched. There's a lot of screaming and blood. You guys know what meconium is? There was a lot of that, too. And you know what the thing is awful and terrifying and horrifying as the experience is for everyone. You still love the baby, and you know that someday it might grow up and be worth something. And in the case of Star Trek, it definitely was. But to your point about how the movie was finished kind of again and again, or unfinished kind of again and again, when we talk about how people feel about that film, it's unique in some ways in the annals of Star Trek, because we're really talking about 4 different movies. We're talking about the theatrical cut, the ABC Sunday Night Movie version with lots of extra stuff that, whether or not it made it better, certainly there was good stuff in there. The original director's edition, and now this final director's edition. So I think everything that you said about how people love it, what they think about it, right? Either it's the best movie next to Khan, or it is the motionless picture. I think both of those things are simultaneously true. That the theatrical cut is exactly as Harlan Ellison described it. I would certainly not describe it as one of my favorite Star Trek films. But the director's edition, particularly the one that you guys just finished, the 4K, it's just beautiful. It's a great film. It's not just a great Star Trek film. It's a great film. Still my second favorite, but it's great.
Yeah, it's so interesting because there's that story, which I don't think is apocryphal, where Barry Diller was walking around New York after the movie opened. There were huge lines, and I said, "Oh, Barry Diller was the head of, chairman of Paramount, or the president of Paramount. You must be thrilled." And he says, "No," he says, "because if we'd made a better movie, we would have made a lot more money." That was the thinking at the time. And of course, there's the famous story of when Harv Bennett is drafted by Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg to Ed Charlie Bluthorn, who was the chairman of Paramount, to do the second film because he was a TV producer and they wanted to do it cheaper. They said, what kind of movies, could you make for $43 million? And, he famously said, I could make 5 Star Trek movies for $43 million. And, Bluehorn turns to Eisner and says, to you, bald is sexy. Bluehorn was a real character. And, the story is that his daughter was a huge Star Trek fan. He wasn't as much a Star Trek fan. So there were a lot of people, even at the time, who weren't huge fans of the franchise. Bob Wise, when he was brought on board, he was largely brought on board because they thought he could manage Gene Roddenberry, because Gene Roddenberry worshipped Bob Wise because he had done a lot of his favorite movies, including The Day the Earth Stood Still. But he didn't come on as somebody who knew a ton about Star Trek. He also was deferring, wasn't it, to his daughter? Well, yeah. And so they didn't know, so the history of a bunch of people who didn't know a huge amount about Star Trek who were getting involved, with the project. And, we see sometimes that really pays off. Obviously, in the case of Wrath of Khan, Nick Meyer literally not only knew nothing about Star Trek, but actively disliked it. He would be, oh, that's the one with the ears. That's when they said, we want you to do Star Trek. But the thing is, he needed a gig. He'd done Time After Time, wasn't a huge success. It's a great movie, wasn't a huge financial success. And when he had the opportunity to direct a movie and, being Nick was like, I wasn't sure, was sort of vacillating on whether he should do it. He said, don't be an idiot. Direct, this is a chance for you to get behind the camera again. And he ended up doing it. And now is largely considered, quote unquote, the man who saved Star Trek. But it was much like Dune, it was a very delicate time. And, things could have very much, we would not be here talking about Star Trek today, I think, if Star Trek the Motion Picture hadn't made as much money as it did. Because even though it wasn't wildly profitable, it was profitable. And it opened the door for much more profitable movies to come.
Yeah, I think, in that vein, we can also probably lay some of the credit for Star Trek's future at the feet of the whale movie, Star Trek 4. It certainly demonstrated to Paramount that that there was money to be made in Star Trek, that it could be bigger than a niche.
From civilians.
Yes, from civilians, not just, the kind of people who would show up to a panel like this for some reason on a Saturday night. Jesus Christ. I don't even know why I'm here. But, I think as much as we like to kind of give a little bit of a hassle to the whale film, I don't know that Star Trek as we know it today would exist.
See, I'm going to be the jerk who actually disagrees with Ashley.
By the way, I do, in fact, like the whale movie. But
so, I and tell you why Ashley's wrong, okay? Because by the time Star Trek 4 comes out, Next Generation is already in development.
True.
So it's not Star Trek 4 that basically says to the studio, it definitely was wonderfully welcoming to the studio. It made Leonard Nimoy's directing career, not Star Trek 3, but really Star Trek 4, because it was such a commercial and critical success. But by then, Next Generation was already happening. And, this is really, by the time of Star Trek 3, the studio saying at some point, this cast is going to get too old to play these roles and too expensive. So what can we do? And, they were terrified of Gene Roddenberry. They didn't want Gene to do it, but they knew if they didn't, he had this Svengali control over the fans, that he would go out there and badmouth it to the fans and no one would take it seriously. So they had secretly developed, this basically Starfleet Academy with cadets, with the guys who had done War of the Worlds for them later. Right. What were their names again? I interviewed them for the book. I don't even remember now. But they had developed one. And then Gene Roddenberry, they brought him in and said, he said, we want you to look at this. We're developing this new series. And he said, this is horrible. This is terrible. They said, well, you think you could do better? And he said, yeah, of course. And they sort of goaded him into doing it. That, a really large check, got Gene, to do it. And of course, the rest is history. You see Next Generation being born. And, I would have to say that in a way, I think Next Generation is maybe the most significant turning point in the history of Star Trek, because had that not worked, because, at the time people were saying, without Kirk and Spock and McCoy, you don't have me, right? And there were a lot of people, including the cast, felt like, Well, maybe that's true. Without Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, how many shows have we seen? The Next Adventure, Zorro, the next, it's his son, or all these shows where it's like the cast after the cast you love. So the fact that Next Generation actually works is pretty amazing.
It's really amazing because the fact that they caught lightning in a bottle again, and let's be honest, largely to the efforts of David Gerald and Dorothy Fontana, who were fired basically when Gene's lawyer got involved, and it was capturing this spirit that was existing out in fandom of a need for expanding the universe, expanding the stories, and moving forward. And I think it captured not only the existing fans after a while, after they got used to it, but also a whole literally new generation of fans who grew up with the Next Generation.
But, I want to expand the case about the importance of Star Trek IV in the context of the Next Generation and kind of lay out a little bit of a timeline, right? So it was November 86 that we got Star Trek IV? Yeah. Okay. So November 86, Star Trek IV, usually popular, extremely well-reviewed, makes a ton of money for the studio. There's excitement for the release of Star Trek The Next Generation, and our excitement was rewarded with Encounter at Farpoint, which I would argue that the lightning wasn't captured in a bottle. In the first season of Star Trek The Next Generation, the lightning wildly missed the bottle. But we still had what we call in the business emotional equity from Star Trek IV, from the performance of that film and how the fans felt about that. And I think that buoyed the first two seasons of Star Trek The Next Generation. 1989, I mean, look, everybody at this table loves Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, but it was not, as far as the studio is concerned, a shining moment. Or for a lot of fans, a shining moment for Star Trek. I mean, and if the third season of The Next Generation had been like seasons 1 and 2, Star Trek would be dead. But what happens? Michael Piller comes along, and Star Trek The Next Generation gets its act together. And it's like, Star Trek was extremely lucky, because at all of the right inflection points, something came along that got an infusion of that emotional equity that carried it forward again, which is pretty amazing and unprecedented. It's like you couldn't have built that timeline with more malice aforethought.
Well, in this case, I'll have to agree with, as Paper gave, with that.
I win again.
I think he's right. There's certain eddies and currents in the history of Star Trek and inflection points, because you could point to, even though, look, we're not huge fans of 2009, as you know from listening to the podcast, 2009 was one of those points where it re-engaged the whole audience and brought in a new audience and got people excited about Star Trek. And Star Trek Picard season 3 really did that recently as well. So it just, when Star Trek starts to lie fallow, there's usually something that comes along that re-engages the fans, no pun intended. And it's really really remarkable, because that's true, because you had Star Trek V and then of course season 1 and 2 of Next Gen, and Star Trek fans are very forgiving. I mean, it was there 1 and 2 of Next Gen, and despite the fact that we did a show on why season 1 and 2 don't suck, there are plenty of really good episodes in season 1 and 2, but it's 26 episodes a season, and there are more bad episodes than there are good episodes of those seasons, and it's some rough going through a lot of that. So the fact that Star Trek fans, we're like Fox Mulder, right? We want to believe. So you stay with it, and you're hoping, okay, maybe next week it'll be better, and in a lot of cases it was. But if you remember, Encounter at Farpoint, and then Naked Now, and then Code of Honor. It's like, but we didn't check out. We stayed with it, right? So we want, finally it comes along 100100101111101, whatever it's called. And
it's like a rap album. What was that?
And Heart of Glory comes along, and that's okay. And Big Goodbye comes along, and that's okay. And then, we, by the end of the season, we're getting to Conspiracy, and we're like seeing glimmers of a show that could be really interesting. And, finally, it starts to connect it. By season 3, it's kind of firing on all cylinders. So it's really interesting. I think that's something that's really unique about the fandom. It's like, for a long time, and maybe this is because the internet didn't exist, we didn't turn on it, right? You see Star Wars fans, they turn on Star Wars. It's mean-spirited and it's aggressive and
But
it's evil.
there was still that, because I was on CompuServe and someone sent me a copy of one of my letters on CompuServe talking about the first season of Next Generation. And I was imploring people to give it a chance. Don't immediately write it off.
Right.
Because, it takes these things a while to ferment. And it was fascinating because it was the same sort of energy. It just wasn't as concentrated as it is now.
Or as public. I mean, and I'm speaking as a veteran of the Usenet flame wars of the 90s. We lost a lot of good people. I mean, honestly, in some ways, I owe my career to the Usenet flame wars over Star Trek in the 90s. And, a lot of the things that we see today in terms of the intense fan reaction to certain things existed back then. And frankly, for a lot of the same reasons. I think there is a section of fandom that we call the test pattern Trekkies, which I feel like at one point I was, and then one day I heard Captain Archer ask Trip, who was in charge of engineering when he wasn't on board, and I went, oh my God. And then there are people who are ready to cast stones at, the slightest faltering. You string a couple of bad episodes together, and suddenly it's the end of the world. As, to quote what's his name from The Simpsons, I was on the internet within minutes registering my disgust. That's been with us for 40 years. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And I have to say, before we move on from the subject of Star Trek the Motion Picture, since today is the anniversary and it is such a crucial turning point in the history of Star Trek, how many of you saw Star Trek the Motion Picture in a theater when it opened? Wow, that's a lot. I'm surprised. What? I mean, it's just wow, that's a lot of people. But, it's sort of...
But that's kind of our audience, too.
Yeah. But, and so I want to ask, just really quickly because I know we want to talk about the future of Star Trek and not the past, but, just the Ghost of Christmas Past, what was your feelings about motion picture then, and what was your feeling about motion picture now? Has it evolved like V'ger?
No, frankly, I gotta tell you, I just didn't like it.
You didn't like it that?
And I mean, I thought I didn't like this out the band. I was gonna stick with it. I was trying to see it that new light. But as the show, as the UB itself, no. Just really wasn't good. I know that I've seen other fets. And frankly, I still fret everything. That the concourse was a good story.
Right.
And the rest of it was a little bit. No.
So Khan won you back, but it wasn't like you weren't going to see Khan because you were disappointed in motion picture.
No, I was going to sit with it. But to your point here and there, the reason, let's be honest here, the reason why fans have turned against Star Wars is because Star Wars turned against fans. Okay? I mean, back in when we're talking about Star Trek and about what was good or what was bad, we knew that it was bad. We knew those first couple of seasons of Next Gen were bad, and we didn't have another force telling us that we were long for fishing them. So now we've got these people who are giving us crap, and tell them that it's bad, and then they say, well, then you're wrong. You're just a race. Yeah, that's why it turned into a plan for. Okay, it was we knew that Star Trek was still trying to give us something obtained that they were going to keep. Well, that's what gave us the impetus to keep giving them another chance.
I think modern Trek can have an argument against that, but I'm not going to leave that right now.
Well, it's also a little bit and I forget who said this first, and I wish I could remember it, but somebody said that Star Trek is a little like sex. Even when it's bad, it's good. And I think that certainly that was true at the time. That was probably me trying to justify why it was bad. It's still good, but no, I mean, I think that even at the time, suffering through some of the less good episodes of The Next Generation when they came out, or the weaker movies or what have you, the things that we like about it still existed within it. It gave us enough reason to kind of have hope for what was there and, maintain the faith in what was there that we could continue.
I wanted them to take a bold step and just kill Wesley Crusher in that episode.
every episode.
I don't think that would have been a bad idea.
Shut up, Wesley.
Forever.
Actually, there slight variation. Star Trek is like pizza. When it's good, it's very good, and when it's bad, it's still pretty good.
And you should never put pineapple on it, for the love of God. Never put pineapple on Star Trek.
I don't know. I think bad pizza is. I don't know. Bad pizza is pretty bad. But okay. Other Star Trek the motion picture, yes.
I was just saying, I was blind when it came out, so I fell asleep. To be honest. But right now, it's my favorite.
Oh, that's interesting.
I watched it several times.
Yeah.
You can stay, sir.
I also like Star Trek.
Yeah.
Well, you can definitely stay.
They'll try to do. Yeah, they ease a beautiful theory. Yeah, I mean, I like 5 until they get the. You work at on. There's other people.
Well, look, I don't want to get in a position of defending 5 because we did that with Bill Shatner. We're obviously big defenders of Star Trek 5. Back at Galaxycon San Jose, we did a wonderful, memorable screening of Star Trek 5 with Bill, where we did a live commentary on the film on stage, and it was glorious because we were there, to praise Star Trek 5, not to bury it. And what was so gratifying was the audience was with us. That was my big worry. People would be laughing at the film.
And Bill shared his pain.
Yeah, and Bill shared his pain. And Bill, articulated really well, all the challenges that he was under. And it wasn't the usual, witty bon mots that he would say when people ask him in an interview. I mean, he talked about, how troubled Harv Bennett was and how he was a mean drunk and how you couldn't talk to Harv in the afternoons, because he was just gone and he was belligerent and, he didn't get to pick any of his keys, which are like the director of photography and the production designer. They were all given to him and he didn't know what he didn't know. Because the only time he directed was for TV, where the showrunner basically decides all that stuff. And this was operated like a TV situation. And it was really interesting. And I think he was really gratified to see how well it played without all the baggage. And of course, we were thrilled to give him that opportunity. So yeah, you're not going to hear us bad-mouthing Star Trek.
Hey, it's Bill Simmons from the Bill Simmons Podcast here to tell you about Michelob Ultra Courtside. It's getting fans closer to the NBA with a chance to win prizes like courtside seats, a trip to All-Star Weekend, and much more. Check it out at MichelobUltra.com/courtside. Michelob Ultra Superior Access, Courtside 24-25 sweepstakes, no purchase necessary. Open to U.S. residents 21 and up. Begins on October 1st, 2024. Ends July 1st, 2025. Multiple entry periods. Visit MichelobUltra.com/courtside for free entry deadlines, and official rules. Message and data rates may apply. Void where prohibited.
This episode is brought to you by Nerds Gummy Clusters, the sweet treat that always elevates the vibe. With a sweet gummy surrounded with tangy, crunchy nerds, every bite of Nerds Gummy Clusters brings you a whole new world of flavor. Whether it's game night, on the way to a concert, or kicking back with your crew, unleash your senses with Nerds Gummy Clusters.
5.
The best characterization of 3.
Yes. And people can't look past the visual effects. Right. That's the problem. And
I wish we could.
And that was a producerial mistake. That was Ralph Winter and Harv Bennett. That was not Bill's decision.
Which Ralph would own. Just a quick digression. Was anybody in this audience in San Jose, is anybody that crazy other than John Carney? Okay. Because I will say that it wasn't just us who were having that moment with Bill. I think that all of the fans who were there, they did something very special for Bill Shatner in that experience. They gave him the opportunity to be honest about his experience. I think that the fan community gave back to him by helping him to feel good about this thing that had made him sad and frustrated for a very long time. And it just goes to show, even when we're talking about weaker seasons or weaker films or things that we don't respond to as much, behind all that are human beings who really give a shit. I mean, there's an irony to the fact that it took a Nicholas Meyer who didn't like Star Trek very much to look at it and say, how can I first of all understand what it is that people like about this? How can I work it so that I like it and it remains what it is? And then Michael Piller to do the same thing, something like 10 years later. Right? Like, that to me is very special. Those people who come from the outside and say, there is real passion that goes into this thing. Nobody ever sets out to make a bad movie or a bad TV show, unless it's like a money laundering scheme. And I guess you would do it. But in this case, yeah. Oh, somebody's. Put it on the main viewer, please. No.
The Hashem in his work, the way he purports roles, and you can say you don't like this episode or that episode, that is still always off to the heart, but you can
Right, and that's what I told my wife.
Well, what's so interesting, too, about motion pictures, a lot of the criticisms of, those aren't the characters. But they're in a different place than they were in the TV series. And I think that's part of what puts people not at ease with it, because, it's not until the end that the family is reunited, and it feels so good. But at the beginning, Kirk is miserable. He hates his desk job. He's not happy. He's not in a good place. Obviously Spock is looking for answers, which he hasn't yet found. McCoy is finally out of the service. I don't know how happy he is. Is he like a veterinarian according to the book?
No, he just got off the set of Saturday Night Fever, man.
Yeah.
Did you?
He's living the disco life.
He's got the flavor saver happening.
He's in a Bee Gees cover band.
Yeah.
But, so obviously, and they're bickering and they're not getting along. And, by the end, they're back where they belong, on the bridge of the Enterprise together. That's their first best destiny. But it takes a while to get there, and I think that why it could often be off-putting to people.
And that's the process of the movie, to get them from that uncomfortable place where they are at the beginning to where we recognize them again.
Yeah.
And that's what people find difficult about it.
Yeah. And it's interesting because it's a lot easier, and I'm not in any way criticizing Khan because I love it, to get into Khan because they are together.
Right. And they're the same as they were.
And they aren't, other than they're grappling with getting older, but they're grappling with getting older together. They're all, already in that situation. But that was also what was sort of liberating about it, that they were able to play the fact that they were, oh my God, 50 years old? Oh no. So old.
Well, those
old people.
Old people.
Yeah. I mean, how old was Shatner when he did Star Trek 2? It was 52, I think.
He was 51 or 52.
So he's a baby.
Over the hill. Jesus.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but so then you have the movies which are, various levels of success, but all made the studio money. The studio wasn't complaining. By the time Star Trek 6, actually the anniversary was 2 days ago.
Yeah.
And then Next Generation is a success on television. And we have a succession of spin-offs and other shows, also with various levels of success. But we're here to talk kind of about the future of Star Trek. And it's interesting because we look at it in the context of, in the last, since the launch of Discovery, there's been a lot of Star Trek, multiple shows. There was a point at which I think there was a Star Trek show on virtually every week, a new Star Trek every week. Now that's changed a little bit in the last couple of years. But now we're once again find ourselves at a weird crossroads because, of course, for those of you who don't know, Paramount is in the process of the sale. It's being bought by Skydance. Soon it will be under to a new crew. We leave it, who will be running the studio. And it has to get certain approvals before that happens. So they're sort of in stasis and not spending money. So basically there's one new Star Trek series, Starfleet Academy, which has been greenlit and being made, and it's going to come out. There's a new season of Strange New Worlds coming out next year. There'll be one after that. That probably will be it for Strange New Worlds. And then this is the last season of Lower Decks. And then there's the Section 31 movie, which is coming out in January, which just dropped a new trailer. So, but you're going to start to see an attrition. There's going to be less and less Star Trek. So my question to you guys is kind of, what is the future of Star Trek? Where are we? Are we watching the birth of a new life form? Is it going to re-emerge stronger and better? Is it going to sort of be that post-Enterprise period where it kind of sort of goes away for a little bit only to be reborn? What do you see as the future of Star Trek?
Look, there are things recently that I even liked a lot. Obviously, we have a lot of love for Picard Season 3. I personally have a great deal of affection for Lower Decks. I'm very sad that this is the last season because I feel like it's glorious. But I also think that in aggregate, very recently, everything. I look at all of the Star Trek shows that exist now as essentially one show, in the sense that the intention was they do want to have a new episode every week. They do want to try to get to the 26 episodes a year, only with different shows and programming it to different audiences. And as a result, in aggregate, everything to me feels like Enterprise. And by that, I mean, when I was watching Enterprise, I could feel Trek as we knew it and understood it dying slowly in a sea of vanilla. And that show didn't speak to me at all. I totally know that it has its fans or people who appreciate it, and lots of people who worked on it, and God bless them. But you could tell that something was winding down. And I feel that same dynamic at play now. And I don't know what comes next. Just like when Enterprise went away, we didn't know what was going to come next. We knew eventually something would happen. But I don't look over the horizon and understand what that's going to be.
I think the short that was released a couple weeks ago.
Are you all familiar with this, though?
Unification. That got so many amazing reactions from people all over the world. I don't know any of this for sure, even though I worked for the company that produced it, and I was an advisor to some extent on it. But I think that direction, meaning people with the technology to show us basically anything we want to see, and people who are so invested with love for that which we know as Star Trek. That combination is extremely powerful, and I think that is one direction that things might go. I hope it does, but I think that sort of can give us a new way of looking at this problem of what will Star Trek become. Will it just be looking into the past? Will it look into the future? Will it be a combination of all of those things? I don't know, but I think that is certainly something that people responded very strongly to.
Yeah.
And I think that is a possible way to go.
But let me ask you about this, because obviously I loved Unification too. But the same question remains. I think one of the big qualms people have with Star Wars today is, for a long time, everything was about the Skywalker saga, and it kind of overstayed its welcome, and there was a lack of playing. But the studio does not.
Well, the problem is they didn't put Luke Skywalker in it.
But the studio doesn't want to give up, an attachment to what, started in '77, because they're unwilling to go in new directions because there's pushback to a lot of that. Now, Star Trek seems to also be mired in this kind of, we're always looking back. It's either the 23rd century, it's the 24th, these beloved characters. But for Star Trek to truly grow and bring in a new audience, does it need to boldly go again? Does it need to develop new characters and new worlds?
I think much like the first episode of Next Generation did, it has to acknowledge that the older folks are still there and we love them and that we're moving on, but we do not denigrate those other people, And I hope that there's a way to do that and continue on, but, maintain the things that we love in our hearts and keep them living as well. I mean, it seems like a silly sort of pipe dream. We can't go home again, but we can see photos of when we were younger, and we can enjoy those memories. And I think that it is important not to sort of write off things and sort of retool them to a modern, quote, attempt at telling the same stories over and over again.
I would kind of... Well, I think there's a lot of things that we should forget. The Section 31 trailer being one of them. Forget. Thank you. Oh, thank you, Spock. You're so kind. Well, I mean, I'll disagree with one thing. I do believe that you can go home again. It's just that you quickly remember why you left in the first place.
Well, this is true.
But to that, I would add your very wise statement about Encounter at Farpoint, that, when Star Trek The Next Generation started, again, warts and all, we had that whole conversation. One very smart thing that Gene decided was that other than a couple of nods in the direction of the original series, that it was not going to be a show where we were constantly going back to that well of Kirk and Spock.
It was the second episode that was a complete remake of the first.
Exactly. But for the most part, what we were dealing with was a show that wasn't running back to the source constantly. And where we are now is we are in shows that, in one case, it's the whole show is literally just running back to that and redoing it. I think you could have a show that's a mere 100 years or 20 years in the future, right, that had nothing to do with the Next Generation, never uttered the word Picard. It could take and should take place on an Enterprise. It doesn't have to be hugely different. What it needs to be is itself, right? It needs to be recognizably Star Trek, but it doesn't constantly have to go back. Hey, remember that time when Pike did the, he didn't. I don't remember it because it didn't fucking happen. We don't have to do that. We can do other things, even Lower Decks, which I think does the fan service in a brilliant way, right? Because it's a very knowing look at, and loving look at those things that happen, and it sends them up in exactly the right way. We need something that doesn't even pretend that stuff exists. It doesn't get its power from it.
And we need something that doesn't retrofit Spock into a weirdo for looking at T'Pring's photo when she's 7 years old.
Well, let me ask you a question. Because, this ties into, how important is canon and respecting canon. So, today we were looking at that Section 31 trailer, and in it, I don't know if you've seen the new Section 31 trailer, there is a character from Sharon with half black on one side and half white on the other. Now, if you subscribe to canon and you're a fan of the original, you know that there were no survivors, that everyone on Sharon was killed. But if you're not, maybe you don't really care, and you say, oh, that's that character that's half white. That's the black and white cookie character, right? So how important do you think it is to respect canon? Obviously with the JJ movies, creating the Kelvin universe was a nice way to get around canon and not have people freaking out that they were going against what had been established. But is that sort of the backbone of the Star Trek universe, and one of the things we love so much, that it's its own alternate history of the future? And
you have 1 minute to discuss that.
Yeah. When you're creating something, again, in the Next Generation example, where you're not speaking about canon, you are almost by definition not violating it. And I think that there's wisdom in that. When you are pulling back references to things from the past, and it's sort of a knowing, hey, look, we watched Let That Be Your Last Battlefield, and we too pretend like it was good. You had better get it right, because then you're giving me member berries. And if, you're trying to offer me that, then it needs to be correct. Otherwise, I hate you, because then I feel manipulated, and it really ticks me off.
You know who hates you?
Everyone.
Thatcher.
Yeah, and he berates me.
And I berate you. So did you say there are only 2 minutes left?
We're at the cutoff point.
Oh my God! Wait, I want to hear like Balok's voice. You have 2 minutes left. But,
okay, fine. Thank you.
I do want to say, that of course, there's as Mr. Spock is fond of saying, there are always possibilities, and I think our hope as Star Trek fans is always that the next show or the next episode of the show, the next season, will be something wonderful. It does concern me that the new movie that's being developed, which is likely to go before the cameras maybe, is, an origin story for the Star Trek universe that takes place after First Contact, but doesn't really tie in with established canon. That is an Earth-based story. And I know, Seth Graham-Brien is writing it. He does love Star Trek. He's a talented writer. But I'm not sure, the studio is still trying to target, go beyond the cult, as they call it. That's what they've called it, It's like, oh, we already have the Star Trek fans. How do we bring in more? Because they still think somehow that Star Trek can become Star Wars. in terms of its appeal, in terms of a wide mainstream. It's just never going to happen. Star Trek is very unique and niche to a certain extent. It's cerebral. A lot of times it deals with science and exploration, and it's just never going to be that kind of Marvel franchise. And yet they don't seem to quite get that. And I think for the future of Star Trek to be successful, we don't need to spend $15 million an episode on television shows. We don't need to spend $150 million on movies. We just need to spend money on good writers and great storytelling. And if we can bring great storytelling back to Star Trek, then it will live long and prosper. But I'm so grateful. This is so nice to do a live episode of the show. And if you're not already listening to the Treksperts, you can find us wherever you listen to Treksperts podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts. And of course, we're now on YouTube. Finally, we have our video episodes up on YouTube. Yeah, I know, right? It's like, what took us so long? We're so grateful to Brian Mix. What took us so long? We're all like
lazy hell.
Yeah. So we found a video producer who's actually been cutting and doing a great job. And we're so grateful to him because we're finding a whole new audience. So if you're not already subscribed on YouTube, I think that, for instance, we just posted an episode today, a bonus episode on Star Trek The Motion Picture. And that's actually better on video because DAREN is doing a reading from the novelization as all the characters. And it's great. And the video version is actually better than the audio version. So I prefer audio podcasts, and I don't want to see DAREN. But if you do, YouTube is really great. And, of course, DAREN is also weekly on the Weird Beardos.
Weird and Beardos, yes.
On the 4:30 movie. Ashley and I occasionally drop in on the Kids Stay on the podcast. So, if you can't get enough of us on the Treksperts, and I know most of you can, then you should check out those other shows. But we're very grateful for our audience. It's our 7th season. And I can't believe we still don't find it boring to talk about Star Trek. I hope you don't find it boring to hear us talk about Star Trek. And thank you so much for being here. And of course, how do we end it? Keep on trekking, ingloriously, of course.